half-century cold case. Police in Fort Worth have arrested a man accused of abducting and killing then 17-year-old Carla Walker.
In 1974, police sat across from the man who killed her. They questioned him, they checked his gun, and then they let him go. For the next 46 years, that man lived quietly in the same part of Fort Worth. He went to church, he raised his sons, he worked as a handyman. And the whole time, one small piece of evidence sat in a police storage room, waiting. This is the story of Carla Walker, a 17-year-old girl who never came home from her school dance, a case that went cold for almost half a century, and a single, nearly invisible stain that finally spoke the truth. If cases like this deserve to be remembered, stay with me. And if you want more respectful, fact-checked cold case stories, consider joining this channel. Warning: what you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Carla Jan Walker was born on January 31st, 1957. By February of 1974, she was 17 years old, a junior at Western Hills High School in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a cheerleader. She was small, standing just under 5 feet tall, with long, honey blonde hair that people remembered. But it wasn't just how she looked. Carla smiled at people in the hallways. She talked to almost everyone. People who knew her described her as confident, friendly, and easy to like. She was dating a boy named Rodney McCoy, the quarterback of the school football team. They talked about the future the way teenagers in love do. They talked about going to Texas Tech University together. They talked about marriage, about starting a family one day. Carla wore Rodney's promise ring. She believed they had a life ahead of them. She lived with her family in Benbrook, on the far west side of Fort Worth. Her father, Leighton, was a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. Her mother, Doris, kept the household running. She had an older sister, Cindy, and a younger brother, Jim, who was just 12 years old at the time. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors. That sense of safety would not survive what happened next. On the evening of February 16, 1974, Rodney came to pick Carla up for the Valentine's dance at Western Hills High School. She came downstairs in a powder blue dress. She wore Rodney's promise ring. He pinned a corsage to her dress before they left. The dance was held in the school cafeteria. The theme was Love is a Kaleidoscope. A local band called Hydra played that night. For a few hours, it was just a normal high school dance. Laughing, dancing, nothing out of the ordinary. The dance ended around 11:30 p.m. Carla and Rodney left with another couple and drove around town for a while. They stopped at popular teenage spots, places like Mr. Quick Hamburgers and Taco Bell. Eventually, they dropped off their friends. Carla told Rodney she needed to use a restroom, so they stopped at the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl. She went inside, then came back out to Rodney's mother's car, a 1969 Ford LTD. They sat in the parking lot. Carla rested against the passenger door, using her purse as a pillow. Neither of them knew someone was standing just outside. The passenger door flew open without warning. Rodney saw a tall man, short brown hair, a vest, a handgun in his hand. The man began hitting Rodney in the head with the pistol. During the struggle, the gun's magazine fell out and landed on the pavement. Then the man grabbed Carla. Rodney heard him say, "You're coming with me, aren't you, sweetie?" Carla called out, "Go get my dad." Then Rodney lost consciousness. When he woke up, Carla was gone. Blood was running down his face. At around 1 in the morning, Rodney drove himself to the Walker home, less than a mile away. He drove over the curb and stopped on the front lawn. Inside, the family was playing dominoes with relatives. Cindy and Jim were watching television. Then came the pounding on the door. Rodney stood there, bleeding, barely able to speak. He told Leighton that someone had taken Carla. Leighton grabbed his pistol and rushed toward the bowling alley. Doris picked up the phone and called the police. The search began immediately. Officers searched the parking lot and found Carla's purse, along with the magazine that had fallen from the attacker's gun. Patrol cars searched the streets through the night. After sunrise, helicopters joined the search. When school resumed, detectives went to Western Hills High. They looked through photographs from the dance. They questioned students. They tried to find anyone who seemed out of place that night. For a few days, the Walker family still hoped Carla would be found alive. Then, several days later, officers searching near Benbrook Lake stopped at a drainage culvert. Inside, they found her. Carla had been beaten. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled. Her blue dress was torn and blood-stained. There were no ligature marks, which led investigators to believe she had been strangled by hand. Some reports suggest she may have survived for close to 2 days after she was taken. These details are painful, and they do not need to be repeated in graphic detail here. Carla's parents were taken to identify her body. Her younger brother Jim went with them. He later said he heard his mother scream when she saw Carla. He said it was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard. He carried that memory for the rest of his life. More than 1,250 people came to Carla's funeral at Western Hills Church of Christ. The building couldn't hold them all. The murder changed the whole community. Teenagers stopped driving around at night the way they used to. Parents started requiring their kids to call when they arrived somewhere. Some students were too afraid to leave their homes after dark. The school even arranged self-defense classes through the TA. Fort Worth police built a task force to investigate. But in 1974, they had almost nothing to work with. No security cameras in that parking lot. No license plate readers. No DNA testing technology. No fingerprints from the attacker. Just an injured eyewitness whose memory was incomplete. There was one real lead. Investigators figured out that the magazine dropped in the parking lot came from a newer model .22 caliber Ruger pistol. They got records from firearms dealers and built a list of local buyers. One name on that list was a 31-year-old truck driver named Glen McCurley Jr. He lived in West Fort Worth, close to both the Walker family and the bowling alley. In March of 1974, detectives went to talk to him. McCurley told them his gun had been stolen out of his truck about 6 weeks earlier, while he was fishing. He said he never reported it because he had a criminal record and didn't want trouble. He said his wife had been out of town visiting relatives around the time of the murder. He gave them his work schedule. Then, he agreed to take a polygraph test. He passed. And just like that, police crossed him off the list. A polygraph doesn't prove someone is innocent. It never has. But in 1974, with no DNA evidence and no other strong lead, that past test was enough to send investigators looking elsewhere. For decades, they never seriously looked at him again. Investigators later noticed troubling similarities between Carla's case and the deaths of other young women around Fort Worth through the 70s and 80s. Several had been strangled. Several were found in isolated places, culverts, fields, and creeks. For years, some in the community wondered if one man, or more than one, was responsible for multiple killings. But no other case was ever conclusively tied to McCurley. That question would remain open. Meanwhile, Carla's clothing, along with the biological evidence collected from her body, was sealed away in paper evidence bags and placed in storage. At the time, there was no way to use it. But paper storage, as it turned out, helps preserve biological material far better than plastic does. That decision, made without any idea of what science would one day be capable of, would matter more than anyone in 1974 could have known. The case went cold. Tips came in for years, then slowed to almost nothing. Carla's father, Leighton, never stopped trying. He kept a metal box full of notes, names, addresses, and possible suspects. He died of a heart attack in 1987, never knowing who took his daughter. Her mother, Doris, died in 2015 after years of Alzheimer's disease. She never knew either. Jim grew up carrying the case with him. He trained in boxing and wrestling. He studied criminal psychology. He even tried to become a Fort Worth police officer, hoping to investigate his sister's murder himself. But an eye condition ended that path. Still, he kept calling the cold case unit, year after year. In January of 2018, he called again. He was 56 years old by then, his eyesight failing, using a guide dog to get around. Detective Leah Wagner took his call. Jim told her plainly, if the killer was still alive, he was getting old too. "We're running out of daylight," he told her. Wagner pulled the old case files, 2 full boxes of them. In 2019, Reserve Officer Jeff Bennett joined her. He built a list of about 80 people connected to the case, who might need to be spoken to again. They re-interviewed witnesses. They talked to Jim and Cindy. They talked to Rodney McCoy, now decades removed from that night in the parking lot. But the detectives kept coming back to the same conclusion. The strongest chance of solving this case wasn't a new witness. It was the Dina sitting in storage, if any of it had survived. Public interest in the case grew again around this time. A true crime podcast brought new attention to Carla's story. A former classmate named Diane Kuykendall made pamphlets about the case and brought them to CrimeCon in Nashville, where she handed them to well-known figures in the true crime world, including retired investigator Paul Holes, known for his work on the Golden State Killer case. Holes took an interest. Producers connected to the Oxygen Network agreed to help fund Dina testing, roughly $18,000. A lab in California examined Carla's clothing and found a tiny stain on the strap of her bra. It was barely visible, but it was enough to build a full male Dina profile. That profile was uploaded to the National CODIS database. There was no match. A separate attempt at genealogy research also failed. For a while, it looked like the expensive testing had led nowhere. But almost all of the sample had been used up in that first round of testing. Only a tiny amount remained. Investigators had a choice to make. They could save what was left and hope future technology improved. Or they could risk it all on one last attempt. They chose to try. Paul Holes connected Wagner and Bennett with David Middleman, head of a lab called Othram, which specialized in extracting genetic information from degraded and extremely small Dina samples. On July 4, 2020, Middleman called Jeff Bennett with a name, McCurley. At first, the family tree pointed to a man named Glen Samuel McCurley Sr., but he had died in 1972, 2 years before Carla's murder. Bennett asked one question that changed everything. Did Glen Sr. have a son? He did. Glen Samuel McCurley Jr. Bennett recognized the name immediately. It was the same man questioned about the Ruger pistol back in 1974. The same man who passed a polygraph and walked free. Investigators began watching him quietly. On July 7th, they collected items he had thrown away in his trash. The Dina from that trash matched the male profile from Carla's clothing. On September 10th, 2020, Wagner and Bennett went to McCurley's home directly. He and his wife Judy invited them inside. Judy recognized Carla's name right away and talked about how much the Walker family had suffered. The detectives explained they were simply following up with everyone questioned back in 1974. They asked Glen for a cheek swab, just to eliminate him. He hesitated. Then he signed the consent form. 6 days later, the results came back. It was a match. On September 21st, 2020, U.S., marshals surrounded McCurley's home. He was 77 years old by then and sick with cancer. He opened the door and was taken into custody without a struggle. His wife watched as officers placed him in handcuffs. For nearly 5 decades, he had lived as a husband, a father, a churchgoer, a helpful neighbor. Now the evidence from Carla's clothing had finally caught up to him. During questioning, McCurley denied knowing Carla at first. Detectives laid out the Dina, the old case file, the gun evidence. Eventually, he said, "I did do it, I guess." But what followed wasn't an honest confession. He claimed Carla left with him willingly. He claimed they had consensual contact. He said he strangled her out of fear she would tell someone, and that she was still alive when he left her. None of it matched the evidence. Not Rodney's account. Not Carla's injuries. Not where her body was found. His story kept shifting every time he told it. The day after his arrest, Jim Walker stood at a news conference and said that after 46 years, 5 months, and 3 days, his family finally had a name and a face. He said he felt compassion for McCurley's wife and sons, that they weren't responsible for what he had done. But he made clear that compassion didn't mean McCurley should escape consequences. McCurley pleaded not guilty at first. His trial began in August of 2021. Rodney McCoy testified. The original detectives and the cold case detectives testified. Prosecutors presented Carla's dress, the DNA results, and the recorded interrogation. Then came a detail that stunned the courtroom. When police searched McCurley's home, they found the Ruger pistol, the very gun he told detectives had been stolen in 1974. It had been hidden inside his house the entire time. On the third day of trial, McCurley changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. Carla's siblings gave victim impact statements. Jim asked him directly to confess if he had hurt any other women. McCurley said nothing. Later, from prison, he denied it all over again in an interview, describing details about Carla that didn't match anything from that night. His story never held together. What held together was the evidence. The DNA match, the genealogy trail, the discarded trash, the cheek swab, the hidden gun, his own guilty plea in a courtroom. Investigators continued looking into whether McCurley may have hurt other women over the years. Some parts of Carla's case, the manual strangulation, the isolated disposal site, the years of avoiding suspicion, raised that question. But no other case was ever officially connected to him. It remains an open question, not a proven fact. Glen McCurley died in a Texas prison in July of 2023. He was 80 years old. He served less than 3 years of his sentence. He died without ever giving a full, honest account of what happened to Carla, and without answering whether there were others. Carla's case later helped inspire new legislation. In May of 2025, a bipartisan bill called the Carla Walker Act was introduced in Congress, aimed at expanding funding for forensic genetic genealogy in cold cases across the country. Carla never got to go to Texas Tech. She never got married. She never got to build the family she and Rodney used to talk about. Her parents died without ever learning the truth. But her brother never stopped looking. And the evidence collected in 1974, quietly stored away for almost 50 years, was still there when science finally caught up. Glen McCurley had been questioned once and let go. He kept his gun. He kept his secret. He lived quietly for almost half a century. But the evidence never forgot him.